Hey everyone, I am the TheChosenOneLegend here, as always joined by my co-host,
Hi, I'm Kai, also known as Fascurreyn.
and welcome back to the BunchaJokahs podcast, where we talk about, well, in this case, more Xenoblade Chronicles 3, because we've got a lot planned. Now, you may have already seen, we did a more general impressions video that's already out on the channel, so check that out if you want our overall thoughts. But from now on, we're going to be breaking down the minutiae of Xenoblade 3, starting with a series of chapter videos looking into individual chapters, and this one will be covering chapters 1 and 2. It's going to be fun, there's a lot to talk about, and it'll be good to get into the little details of it now.
Yeah, game's finally complete for both of us, pretty much, and we're able to, really sort of get into the details of our thoughts on all of it and all that, so it's going to be exciting.
Exactly, and pre-warning that there will be spoilers here, this is a spoiler discussion for chapters 1 and 2, but also potentially for the rest of the game. We might allude to certain things and connections, so if you haven't beaten the game yet, you're going to want to do so before checking out this video. But for those of you staying, hope you guys enjoy. We're just going to get into it straight away, if you're ready, Kai.
Let's do it.
And I'll probably put some timestamps in the description if you want to check out different sections. But starting things off, we start the game with our first look at the end of Xenoblade 1's world and our sort of tease, the thing we saw in the trailer of the two worlds merging. Now, we could go deep into like the looking of the Xenoblade 1 world, but I think it might be better to save that to the end of chapter 7.
Yeah,
We'll probably
I
have more
agree.
things to say about it then. But what were your first thoughts going into this? I mean, I just loved how they set this up. Straight off the bat, yes, these worlds are merging. If you know what's happening.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. I mean, everyone who's played the previous games was like, they knew that this was coming. The
Yeah.
whole tagline of the game is like, when the worlds combine, or whatever, something along those lines. So
Mm.
the fact that they showed it in like the first minute of the game, I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. But the way they do it still keeps like such a mystery around the whole game, which I really do appreciate.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, of course, we go into it and it opens up on Uriah getting wrecked by
Yeah.
annihilation events, which are probably things to talk about in the chapter 3-4 video more, but once we see that, opens up into Everblight Plains and the fight against Colony Sigma, and I think that was a good way of showing it off, is like, this world is filled with conflicts between the two places and the two colony types, and
Yes.
that's like, it really encapsulates what the current world is all about, which I appreciate.
Definitely. It definitely felt very Xenoblade 1-ish, starting off with a big battle. And it makes
Hmm.
sense, compared to Xenoblade 2, which is overall a bit more of a peaceful world. We are at a world at war here, chaos is happening, and getting straight into the action is a great way to pump you up, to introduce you to you got your narration of Noah talking you through the ways of this world. Sort of,
Hmm.
we knew most of it from the trailer, we sort of knew lots of the premise of it. But yeah, it really, it throws you right into things, and from that first moment, the music playing and the way it transitions into the battle music as well, it's high energy. It's like, yes, this is a Xenoblade game again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just overall like a really solid opening, I think. Of course, we got to see that in like the first trailer and everything, so that was always pretty cool. Um, so yeah, I think that was pretty good. I like how you do have Noah narrating over this battle. It's very reminiscent of Xenoblade One's opening, actually.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I guess from there you just kind of go into learning more about like the world and then also the battle system, which is quite fun.
Yes, well, we are going to break gameplay. Is going to be its own video, so we won't go too much into gameplay mechanics in these
Yes.
chapter series. But it really does like throw you straight into it, eases you into stuff, and it's even straight away. You win the battle, you're able to succeed, but you don't feel great about it. It's very somber, and Noah's a
Hmm.
great introduction into this idea that this world is kind of messed up. We're going to go straight into flashbacks after this. We got child soldiers here, basically. That's what this world is. The
Hmm.
moment that they're all cheering, like, we took your lives are ours. And the way they're all chanting that, and then Noah's just sitting there like, yeah, this is messed up. It really
Yeah.
portrays this is a very serious game straight off the start. It doesn't, again, games like Xenoblade 2 and even 1, I think, take a bit more time for it to get really dark and existential. But Xenoblade 3 throws you in really quickly.
It is pretty crazy, isn't it? And I feel like I'm not really going to touch on the background music for cutscenes much here, but I feel like that opening one did sort of really portray Noah's thoughts at the time. And then the most interesting part to me is that while that's happening, the other main party members, Lance and Uni, they're like celebrating a ton with all the other soldiers. So it's interesting to note that it's like Noah's like the only one that feels this way at the time, and everyone else is just super like chill with everything. The terms, the fighting, or all of it, even the fact they only live for 10 turns, they all seem super chill with it because that's the norm for them. And like even outside of games, like just from I don't want to go too into it. I don't want to sound like one of the cringy Persona 5 fans, but like from even like a literature perspective, it's a really, really cool setting to start off with of the war and the terms and everything. So I do appreciate the game laying that out from the get-go. It's a cool thing to expand upon.
Yeah, I love how each Xenoblade game creates its own complete new world and setting like that. Each world has its own rules and boundaries, and getting to discover that. In this game, we sort of talked a bit about this in our main discussion, how this game there's no big like crazy revelations of like the world so much as we sort of know from the start. We talked about in the intro, it shows the world's fusing. We know that from the start. But finding out the how and the why is still a big part of it. Like, why is the world the way it is? Why do people live for 10 terms only? How did this end up happening? You are asking all those questions right from the start. And I think it's interesting as well how we go back and we see... So to talk a bit more about the flashbacks we see, we get a bit of the training scene of Noah and his gang fighting Garvel.
Yes.
And the action in this is so well choreographed. It always is. It's Xenoblade. I don't know if you expected anything else. I don't know what you're on about, but yeah, it is great. The way like we see certain things, like I love Uni's weapon. It's just really cool. The way the little end spins when she's flying off. Yeah. It's getting to see those in like combat scenes as well as gameplay. It is really fun.
Yeah, and one other thing I appreciate about those flashbacks, actually, is, like, they could have very easily done the classic thing of, like, the main protagonist just clutches the battle on their own single-handedly, etc., etc. But no, they made it so that, actually, in fact, I think Lance was the one who was doing the best in that opening battle, protecting everyone. Noah was helping, of course, but, they were all doing their part. And in the end, they didn't even win that, like, flashback battle. So I just like how it shows that like these aren't immortal plot armor protagonists, but they are just genuine soldiers like everyone else.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very interesting turn on that they are just part of the whole group of it, the whole system. Yeah. And then we see a bit more of this. We see in the flashbacks the homecoming ceremony.
Yeah.
And again, this adds to how like dark and depressing the game is off the start. That these young kids are like saying, "Oh, that's going to be me." This person's literally dying after 10 years of life, and they're celebrating it and envious of it. And it's like, wow, this world is depressing.
It's so interesting that that's what they're used to. It's a great concept.
Also, our first look at Queen Melly. I loved. We all knew, like we all know that, and obviously, it turns out it's not exactly Melia, but we all know that it's meant to be her. But
they made
even
it
then,
obvious.
The way that they kept her masked, and there's like something's off. Something isn't right, and you don't know what it is. I don't think I predicted she was a robot, to be honest with you. But
no,
still.
We'll get to that in chapter 4.
Yeah,
but like,
oh
my
there.
god, I didn't expect that. I knew something was off, but not exactly that.
It's really smart how they keep you. They don't go too on board with the Xenoblade 1 and 2 stuff. They keep the 3 its own entity in its own game, but they leave so many questions about what is Melia doing here? What is this like? Why is she in charge of this? And why is she a bad guy? All these questions straight away. And this transition... Oh, go on.
Yeah,
Go on, Kai.
Like, that is one thing that will be like an ongoing thing, is just how well the game manages to balance being references to Xenoblade 1 and 2 and, keeping you wondering about that, while also 100% being its own game.
Yes.
And, if you hadn't played the others or knew nothing of the others, this would still pretty much be like its own thing that's very well respected. So, there's definitely that as an appreciation.
And this is probably a good time because that scene transitions. We see a little bit of a character, Chris, who we'll get to later, a lot later down the line.
A lot later.
But a lot later. But our first introduction into the Offseeing, really, and we see Noah playing the melodies, and I just love everything to do with the Offseers. And for start, the music is just beautifully played. Anytime that they play the Offseeing melody, the feels are coming.
Yeah,
but
the flute motif is very cool.
Yeah, not just both in like the general times they're playing it and how they use it in music and combat music, which we'll get to in a little bit. That's they go all in with that. But what do you think of like the whole idea of the Offseers? I think it's a really interesting way of doing it. That the carrying on the voices of the departed and what that means and what it means for different people. Even though ultimately you could argue that it's meaningless, but the way it influences the characters' lives, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because Offseers, well, I feel like the main thing it does is it reflects what Noah and then eventually Mio are like as people. Like, if nothing else, being Offseers reflects their personalities. So that's pretty cool. On top of that, just having a way for it to be like, we're soothing the war and that sort of thing. Like, it's a really weird juxtaposition between like, we're trying to make the war, less fragile, and we're trying to make people less upset about it. But at the same time, by doing the Offseeing, they're kind of treating these wars as if they're a normal thing. So it's simultaneously like, we're doing a good thing for the people, but we're actually promoting the war happening further because we're the ones who are helping to clear it up. It's a weird contrast, but the role of Offseeing is interesting. Of course, it's a new thing here, and I think it's got a very good place in the story.
Also, damn, I wouldn't be able to play it, but I want myself Noah and Mio's flutes. I want them.
100%. Yes, we need physical versions, please.
Yeah, if that would come with the collector's edition, I would have dropped any price.
I don't know how to play the flute, but goddamn, I'll learn.
Yeah. I think this is probably a good time. We're introduced now to the dynamic of Noah, Lance, and Uni properly throughout sort of the flashbacks, and we see them now. Mm-hmm. Such great characters, such a great cast. We talked about this in our general discussion, but immediately, you got your sort of Lance as sort of your meathead, a bit like you're kind of your Ryan character. Mm-hmm. Uni just, the moment she calls Lance a Muppet, I'm in love with her character. That's it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think those three immediately make a good sort of dynamic together. You can tell they're all very comfortable with each other. The conversations are very casual. Overall, they did a very good job of making the characters seem alive. And of course, like you say, the British dialect that they all adopt is all very charming as well. It's all pretty fun on that front with what they say in the gameplay and everything. So, yeah, I really like this cast. I think they all just get better as time goes on. They did the characters very well here, and I'm glad that they are unique. And as much as Lance may have similarities to Ryan, because they do, and Noah does have similarities to Shulk. It's not, it's not like they don't. But although they follow similar archetypes, it's clear that they did a good job of making them their own separate characters.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't feel like discount Ryan or anything like that. It still feels very unique. And I never at one point thought like they repeated an arc that Ryan went through or anything like that. They still keep the stories the characters go through are very different, so it's not ever a problem really. And also in talking about like the British dialogue, I don't know how you feel about this, but I even love the stuff like the use of snuffing and sparks. It's so dumb.
It's cool. It makes the world feels like its own thing. It's like saying "what on Bionis" and stuff like that, and thank the architect. Yeah. It's really like that, and that's another thing that just makes the world feel more alive. Really, it's a really nice touch.
Yeah, definitely. And I think now to talk a little bit about our first main location a new location that we're going to go to, our first colony, Colony 9.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say, first of all, why did that song never reappear? The first Colony 9 theme you hear, except I think in Xeon's Quest it might have later down the line, but I miss it. It's so good.
Which one?
The heroic Colony 9 theme that plays when you visit it. Do you not remember
Is
this
it
one?
unique the first time you go there?
Yes, it's a unique track, and afterwards
Oh.
it's not the standard Keves colony theme. It's like a unique heroic version that only plays at this moment, and I
I
think
didn't
it
realise
plays
that.
during a cutscene in Xeon's quest. Go have a listen to it after this, honestly, Kai. It's a really it's also great what it represents because it's very it's like a military theme. It's like a proud to be military heroes kind of. We are victorious. It's very pumping, very energetic. It wouldn't have fit later on, when things are a bit more melancholy, freedom from the flame clock. But it's a banger, honestly.
I'm going to listen to it while we're talking here, because I can play it in the background, I think.
Yeah, go for it. I definitely recommend looking it up. But I like Colony 9. For start, just calling it Colony 9 is a nice throwback, starting off with Colony 9.
Yeah, very deliberate there, for sure.
Yeah. But although, I feel like the colonies, by nature, you never get as much to them as you do like a city in Xenoblade 1 or 2, because, they're military installations that are meant to be kind of somewhat mobile as well with the Phoroneses. But I love the whole setup of you walking through the Phorones in Colony 9 and having it be part of the camp. That still felt really neat the first time.
Yeah, I've listened to this theme now. That is... I really remember that. I'm surprised I didn't realise that was never played again, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good theme. I remember that one because it reminded me of Field of Hopes and Dreams. So...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I do like Colony 9. I will say, of course, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the OG because the colonies in this game are much smaller.
Yeah.
With there being more of them. Makes 100% sense. I get it. It's alright, again, very small. Not a lot going on there. But, it's chill, I guess. It's an interesting start at the very least. You do get to see Z on there at the time, and he's just an NPC. I think one thing that I was kind of wondering about is how important Colony 9 would be throughout the game, and it turns out it doesn't have any significance whatsoever. It's even an optional area to liberate later on. It's actually one that I imagine most people playing through the game never even did because it's so out of the way. But yeah, I think I wasn't really sure how to feel about that, but at the same time, I don't know how they would have fit it into the story. But overall, it was a cool place. I feel like they did tutorials well enough there of showing you how colonies can work. I love the sort of almost false tutorial they give about the flame clocks.
Yes, yeah.
Where actually the only point of it was to, give you a general idea on the narrative of the colony, and that's the only purpose of it. But still, it's quite fun.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good way to start things off in introducing the sort of the military side of things and how their lives work when they're not, out in the combat field. Even the obviously there's a bath scene here, but it's a Xenoblade game. But I think it does a very good job of establishing the fact that these people, they don't think of anything like romance and that. They're not embarrassed about it. They're just all bathing together, and it isn't to bring that up to the relevance. It's not until later where things like the city, or even after they become Ouroboros, when suddenly the guys are embarrassed to get changed and go off hide somewhere else. I think that is actually cleverly done story foreshadowing for later on until they actually realize, the way they live right now. It's all just water. Then that's all there is. They don't think of anything more than that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one that leisure like that is not just a thing. There is no romance. There's not even family at that point, which is of course a big plot point at a later point. But just the fact that it's like they're just constantly out at a war site is so interesting. Does more to set the dynamic up. So that scene, I'm sure the fan servicey fans loved it. Sure, more than anything though, that scene was one of the first places we get to touch on a bit more about lands and the past of Joren, which is fun.
Yes, it's interesting. They do this with a lot of characters, and we'll get to later ones later. But with things like Nimue and Miyabi, these characters who sort of we see loads of flashbacks to past events, and it's not till later on. We're not going to be able to see the full story of Joren until chapter 3. And what really happened there. but they give these little teasers, and they tell you exactly what happens, but you don't know why, and it's an interesting way of setting it up, because the other Xenoblade games didn't really do that as much, or at all, really.
No, they didn't have that, and I was always wondering from the start, like, how is he going to be important? How is this going to play into things? Because a lot of the way through Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, like, they really set up a lot of cutscenes talking about Joren. So I was always wondering, like, what exactly is this going to build up to, which we do eventually see, but, it's just an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a good way of keeping it on your mind throughout. It never feels like forced. Anytime that we see a flashback to it, it's always relevant. And we sort of get little glimpses about how it's affected Lands, like how he's still blames himself. As early on as now, we get that. And it means that later, because we're not playing during those events, we're not playing the game across that happening. It allows it so it keeps it in the back of your mind, so that when the moment does come, which we'll get to in Chapter 3, there's payoff and it makes sense. And yeah, I think the way they timed that is interesting, but I think it works in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I think they did a good job of it overall. Of course, from that point, after all the tutorials and stuff in Colony 9 and that, you get into Yzana Plains after that cutscene. Of like the mission of, Agnus forces, and we need to get this unidentified thing that isn't Agnus. And then you get to explore Yzana Plains, and I liked it as an opening area. It didn't remind me of Gower Plains or Golmot, because I don't think it's meant to. But it did remind me a little bit of the area surrounding the original Colony 9. That's kind of the closest I felt.
Yes, yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's interesting that I think it's probably like the biggest area to explore for an early game, I think, in a sense. Like, it almost...
the original Colony 9 was huge. Trust me.
That's a fair point, I guess I meant in terms of areas...
But...
Yeah. I guess I'm also meant in terms of areas it expects you to explore, because I know you can explore more in Colony 9, but a lot of places block you off with high-level enemies and that.
Yeah, exactly. You are right on that front.
Which this does less of. There's like a big open plains that sort of encourages you to walk around. Technically not all of it, there's like that big cave, which you're not going to get into at that point. Like, okay, there's level...
I tried.
I know you did, Kai. I know how you play this. Did you not survive it?
I got a fair bit of the way in, but not far enough to do anything.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's definitely in the area. You've got your first unique monster. Of course, you've got to get your Bunnet there to take down. Died a few times to it, but I kept going.
Classic.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it keeps with like the music in this area is still very. This isn't your high energy. Like you said, it's not Gower Plains. You haven't got pumping energy exploring the world yet. That's going to come later. This is more like. It still fits with that whole somberness of war, and they're not free from it yet. They're still part of that. So it makes sense that it has this lower energy to the area.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's a somber song, and that was not what I was expecting, but it makes so much sense in hindsight. So it's a neat touch, even the area looks a little almost drab, like not in a bad way, but like the colours are much more subdued than Millick Meadows. And I think that's a really interesting way for it to kick off. But then also, like I say, just giving you that open sandbox of area to explore. There's a couple of side quests here and there, stuff like that. It was nice. It was a nice way for people, you can just run right through it to the end if you feel like doing the story, or you can explore it and really get into the game. You are given that choice.
Absolutely, yeah. And, of course, I also should mention that maybe for the first time we hear Riku's voice just before they set out. Man, what a Chad voice does Riku have? It's so great.
Yeah, Chadpon.
Have you heard his Japanese voice?
I have not. Maybe I have and I've forgotten.
I'd recommend looking it up at some point, because it is the complete opposite. It is like your high-pitched anime voice. It's so weird. In comparison, they literally took the complete opposite approach, which I find hilarious. But I'm glad we went with like a deep voice Nopon. I think it suits his character. And sort of, obviously we'll delve into this later on, but there seems to be more to his character that even by the end of the game we don't know. So I think it keeps him this sort of bold, mysterious character. But I like the approach. It's a nice change for Nopon.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fun one. Riku as a character is interesting. He doesn't throughout a lot of the story he's never like essential, but he's a nice addition. He has his purposes and is a good character. So, he's cool to have there as a Nopon representative. It's fun.
Yes. And then, so once you're done exploring, we get to sort of Alfeto Valley area, I believe, and we are introduced to this mysterious force of course, with hindsight, we know to be the city and that. But I found it really interesting the way that the design of them, how it looks almost more realistic, more real world, which I guess, as we'll see later on, it sort of makes it connect to how they are sort of the way life is meant to be, and we're even going to see a bit of that this chapter. But it felt odd, like the way that they teased them up and the way they build up the city in general and these characters as this mysterious third force. Mm-hmm. How did you find that going into it? Did you have like big predictions for them, or?
I wasn't exactly sure because the whole thing of like, oh, you've got to reach Sword March. We didn't know what that was before release. We didn't know what exactly the deal was. We didn't even know that the city was there. All we knew was of this third force. And I wasn't sure exactly how they'd have played into it. I didn't really make that many predictions off the top of my head. But when we did sort of slowly learn, like, oh, that's where the normal people are or whatever, I was like, okay, yeah, that works. And I was more so just curious on how they were going to continue on with it. But as a start, it was pretty interesting, yeah.
And of course, we encounter the rest of the party. We are in the middle of the fight. We get to meet our Agnus characters Mio, Tyon, and Senna. And I mean, we knew from the trailers that the scene was happening. We knew it was going to happen pretty early on. But in general, I love that it introduces you to your full party at the beginning of the game. We touched upon this a bit in our general discussion, but it really allows these character dynamics to start early and continue throughout in the way that no past Xenoblade game has really done. I mean, to the most extent, it's something like Torna, but even then, you get characters join later on. So I love how they throw this in right at the beginning. They don't build up to it and take too long. Getting them meet in Chapter 1, I think, was the right decision, and definitely pays off.
Yeah, I agree. Even from a gameplay perspective, it's very satisfying to me that you have them all from the get-go, because then you don't run into as many complications of like, oh, their levels are really out of sync, and oh, why is Zeke 10 levels above, and whatever. There's that sort of thing, and it's good that that's not the case here. So I do like that. The opening battle you have against them is quite nice. It's a cool 3v3 idea, both sides being balanced. And then the following sort of choreography for that scene was also really good. That's one of the best ones in the game, in my opinion, is the part where Noah fights Mio, and then they sort of, Noah's figuring out, like, oh, she's doing it to the Offseeing tune of Agnus, and, I need to time how to dodge her. Like, that was sick. Yes. Loved anything along those lines across the game. It's always very fun when that sort of thing happens. So I really liked that. And I will say one other thing about that scene that was like, that one scene was really playing on my mind through the first half of the game. Because there's a point in that scene where both of them stop at different points and are like, oh, what's that high-pitched sound? Because you kind of hear it.
Yeah.
And I think it ended up just being the Ouroboros egg device thing. But like, man, I had so many theories running through my head on what that noise was. I thought they'd been transported to a different world or something when that happened, and crazy stuff like that. Like, I thought they were caught up in an Annihilation event or something like that. It's like I had so many ideas running through my head. But regardless of that, the scene itself was very good, kind of showing off, no, these are actual real people underneath their masks when they come off.
It helps that, of course, we knew these were main characters going into it, but it really, we teased this earlier with Noah, like, Offseeing for the other sides, mourning their dead as well. But now we put a face to it, we really get to see that, no, both these sides, and as they discover through their conversation, they've suffered the same pain. They both begin to realise, they've taken lives from each other, that's all they do, and we're going to introduce Vandham now. Vandham comes in and breaks them down, and is like, yeah, this is wrong, you guys are messed up.
Yeah, I do like how, as a small thing, I saw some people before release saying that, oh, the Keves and Agnus is just like Bionis versus Mechonis, and like obviously it's not. It's not even close to being the same thing, because that was a
No.
clear sort of, there is one side you're a part of and supporting, there is another side you are not. No, this is both the sides are caught in the same problem, and you've got to work together to solve it. It's a very different dynamic, and I like how they display that from the get-go. But yeah, Vandam comes in. He's got a cool design. I like it. The voice actor coming back was a pleasant treat. That was all pretty
Also,
fun.
we sort of glossed over. He lost his two teammates, Yu and Zero, which are just. I mean, they had to do a reverse on us, didn't they? They had to kill off
They
Yu and Zero
did.
first.
God, that was so tragic, because I heard their
Yeah.
names and I was like, yo, it's them, and then they died like immediately. I was like, okay, never mind. Sure.
It was a
Brilliant.
neat reference. I'm glad they threw
It
that
was
in there.
very nice. I really appreciated it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, everything about, the mystery of Van that we sort of talked about earlier, the mystery of the city, but the fact that, he raises so many questions, the way he opens their eyes, and that there's more to life, that there's more than what they're doing and that there can be more. I just find that, I just love everything about that scene and the way he introduces them, and he sort of fits with things that Noah's already thinking, but then sort of sets them off on that path. I think it's a shame. I mean, we might as well say now. Of course, Vandam is killed here. He ends up being killed by Mr. Wild Ride, who's going to enter. But I did not expect to lose Vandam this early on. I thought he was going to be a key player, and
Yep.
I guess they have to kill Vandam in the chapter he's introduced in. I guess maybe they're just
Maybe that's the rule. Yeah.
yeah. But man, that was.
I mean, he was.
gut punch.
I was similar to you. I was in one of two minds. I was like, well, there's two things that could happen. He either, comes and goes from the party as an important character, kind of like Alvis was and stuff like that. Where, he's clearly important, but he just comes and goes while he's doing his thing. He sets them on the right path and goes off to do his own thing. Or I was like, option two, he is Mr. Wild Ride, because that was a big theory ongoing before. It's like he makes them realise, transforms into it, because of course we didn't have context on how Moebius works back then. And then attacks the party. But no, he just dies. He says like 2 lines to the party, dies immediately, sad. Well, not immediately, but you get the idea. At least he put up a bit of a fight with his mobile artillery, as I want to call it.
He really did crash that mobile artillery into the Moebius,
He did. How long have you been in the city? 4 seconds.
Oh, that's great. But yeah, I mean, we're skipping ahead a bit, but I think it's good, whilst we're on Vandam, to cover it now. His death was an emotional moment. The music that plays and the fact that they then play the Offseeing melody for him. That whole moment, again, not to skip ahead too much, but when Mio starts and then Noah joins in, and there's that sort of unspoken bond between them, that the way that sort of begins. It's not like I love how, the dynamic, it doesn't start straight away. They're not immediately friends. When Mr. Wild Ride shows up, they're fighting him because they have to. And it takes a little bit for them to start to trust each other. They don't join forces immediately, They don't immediately be like, yep, we're going to go to Sword March. They go separate ways for a bit. But like you said, the whole thing of the Offseeing melody and what this Offseeing what this means to them, it gives Neo. I'm going to do that every time. It gives Neo and Noah this sort of immediate bond, and it's very well handled, all of that between them.
I do like, again, just starting off with the dynamic. This is something we're going to discuss a lot. But how immediately they're like, no, we're not friends. We're going to go our own ways, and kind of low-key hope that you die because you're the other side. But then they learn. Also, when you're fighting D in the first chapter, Moebius theme plays. It's a bop. It's a bop. It's a bop. It's a bop.
So good. Yeah.
Wild Ride as a character is one that will come and go, but he is, just very fun in the opening chapter. You can sort of tell the wild nature of the Moebius and how carefree they are, and their power. Of course, you do technically get Ouroboros, but it's hardly touched on, so I don't think it's worth talking about yet either. But
yeah,
is that
get a
all
little
of
bit...
chapter 1? I think
that's mostly it. Yeah, I think that Moebius. It was a great introduction to him. He's a very over the top villain. He's a bit like your sort of Mumka. I think is the easiest comparison.
There's a lot of similarities that we'll be able to touch on at a later point, yes.
Absolutely. But I love how just like crazy he is. He's a great one to introduce you to start things off, yeah. And even I believe at this point, not that you'd know this, but I think he's actually interlinked with Joren at this point already.
Oh, I called that in one of the early trailers, because in the beginning of Chapter 2, you see him come out of the interlink and Joren, Consul J is standing behind him. I called that. I'm happy with that. The only other thing from Chapter 1 I don't think we touched on, MWAMBA is there, of course, as a party member.
MWAMBA, yes.
Unfortunately. I do like how he was just kind of there as a friend. They did give him a little bit of time, focus on like, he's near his 10th term. Again, sort of give him more focus to the homecoming system. Legend. Just a legend of a character, and I hope we get it. I know we're not going to, but I really hope they give him as like a free hero, because no one else has the sharpshooter class in the game. And I know it's similar to other classes, but god damn it, give me my MWAMBA hero, please.
I love how that MWAMBA's one of those characters that people have just locked onto. They always show up in Xenoblade games, and I think one of my favourite comments I've seen is it was on this is like much later, but I was listening to Consul M's battle theme, and someone's like, I love it when Consul MWAMBA shows up.
Yes. So true. So true. Oh
yeah. It starts MWAMBAing all over the place or something like that.
Yeah, it's great. MWAMBA has become like almost the gatekeeper of Xenoblade 3, and I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. He's a charming lad.
Yeah, get out of here, Hacked. We're all about MWAMBA, so...
no one cares about Hacked. Get out of here.
But yeah, that's it ends... You know, they try to go their separate ways, but they realise they can't, like we said. They have to join forces, and... Yeah, and then we are on to Chapter 2 now. We are set on our way to the second chapter. And first things first, should we talk about Millick Meadows, Kai?
Suppose so, yeah. I mean, before that, there is like the teams becoming familiar with each other again. You kind of see Lance and Senna already being friends, and
that's true. Yeah.
One thing I noticed in these early chapters is Lance and Tyon both get a lot of like focus in the story and what their thoughts are. You know, they're both very begrudging to be friends with the others, and I do appreciate that. One ongoing thing is that they don't make Noah and Mio the focus of every single plot point, because it really annoys me when they do that with main characters. So yeah, of course they team up, you get 6 party members, which is heaven in gameplay.
That's great.
And then you do get to Millick Meadows with the big open grassy field and the theme and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's pure Xenoblade is the best way I can put it. You know, being able to, I mean, quite literally, because you've got I love how there's, you know, the little tower things, whatever you call them, from Yzana Plains out there. You've got like the wings of Gormott. It took me ages to realise that in the background is Gormott's neck and be able to properly recognise that. But that's really neat as well. Yeah, just the way that this, the way that it's like, okay, Xenoblade 3 doesn't do this much in areas. It doesn't have a lot of high energy tracks and atmospheres. A lot of it's more mellow, which I guess fits the world more. But they have to have that one to start off your adventure, and Millick Meadows fulfills that very well.
Yeah, I think that it's a fun area. Interestingly enough, like, you don't do a lot here. You kind of just breeze through the area, save for a couple tutorials. But regardless, like, it's surprisingly small, but when you think, it's actually just one half of Ietia, you're like, okay, that makes a bit more sense. To be honest, I wouldn't say I rated the area as high as Gormott or Bionis Leg, but I still really liked it. The theme is, of course, very good. It gets more catchy the more you listen to it, so that's always fun.
We're also introduced to the Keves battle theme now, which, damn, that flute goes hard. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It is a good theme, isn't it? God damn. I remember listening to that before the game released. Over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. I cannot blame you at all. And we really get some great views here as well. This is, I think, our first good look at the Mechonis sword you can see now. I mean, you can see a bit of it from earlier areas, but now we get a proper look at the world. And in general, I mean, we talked about this in our general video, but I love how you can see so much of the world around you from different points. You know, even as early as Everblight Plains, you can see Agnus Castle, which you're not going to get to till much, much later. and you can
Yeah.
see the whole area above you of Capticon Peak, I believe.
Capticon Peak, yes.
Yeah, which I was like, can you go there? Can you visit there? And sure,
Already
you can.
getting into that.
Yeah.
Makes the world feel alive when you can see the other areas ahead of time and be like, no, it's not just one area transition to the next and you cannot even see it. You very well can.
Yeah. But like you say, there's not too much big story stuff here, but there's a lot of small stuff between the characters, little scenes which add up and add a lot. You know, we get the beginning of things like Uni and Tyon sort of teasing with each other.
We ship it. We ship it.
Yep, best ship. I know anyone. I actually, Kai, I watched back the other day our predictions video, or sort of our like analysis video, and even then you were like Uni and Tyon on the best ship, and I was like, yeah, you called it.
Yeah.
You completely called it.
I think in the series, like, I'm not even pretending, like, I'm not even doing a bit here. I think it's the best in the series. It's just very charming, and
Yeah,
it's
I'm
so
with you.
all of the relationships like that in Xenoblade 3, they're all so awkward that it feels the most real, you know?
Yeah.
Like, even that scene where they were all changing into the new clothes in end of chapter 1, the fact that, like, there wasn't any fan service in the slightest, it was just, like, really charming awkwardness. And
Yeah.
I'm all here for it. It's so nice to have the characters interact in this way that feels very real and very engaging, rather than just boring, everyone is friends, or, you know, vice versa.
And speaking of like the awkwardness between them, like we sort of passed over it, but that scene at the very end of chapter 1 when they're introducing themselves to each other and they like they take their turns like some sort of
Riku
meet
is
and
Riku.
greet.
Manana is Manana.
Yeah. I love that entire section. That just immediately tells you everything you need to know, especially about, you know, the Agnus lot who we haven't spent time with yet. It's a great way to set you on that. And that's really what this is about. Millick Meadows and the end of chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 2 is all about setting in place these character dynamics and setting the groundwork for later. And it does that very well.
Yeah.
But then, you know, we come to the Faunus region now. We make steps into Eagus Wilderness, which is a very different like atmosphere, going straight from Millick Meadows to this very sort of chill ambient sort of. It's not quite ambient music, but it really sets the tone differently, and I quite like this area though. It's not like exciting. It's pretty, by nature of being like a barren desert kind of thing. It's kind of plain, but I think there's quite a lot to it, and this is really your step where you can see like so much of the rest of the world. We'll cover more of the Faunus region in the next chapter, but you can see a lot because the Faunus region is huge.
Yeah. Faunus region's interesting because, you know, you get opened up to it here. They have like a really long cutscene at the beginning of that area about which way to go. I don't know why they spend so long on it, because it didn't actually end up having many long-term implications, but they did. It was the whole thing of like, oh, which way to go, because one of the ways would have taken you through a late highway.
Yes, I think a part of it is, didn't they mention that the route they're going is the longest one? They're taking the longer route.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I think, what they're inferring there is, you know, of course, there's the whole thing with his Mio, which we haven't really touched too much on, but she's got not much time left. She's only got 3 months left.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I think
they do
you can
talk
tell
about
that even though he's not saying it, I think Tyon is wanting to go the shorter route because of Mio. And it's actually Mio who's like, no, let's go the route that's safer. She doesn't want anyone to rush on her behalf. And I think I kind of like it.
She's super chill.
Yeah, they don't even bring it up. Like, Tyon doesn't say, you know, Mio, you haven't got much time left. But they, like, the way the camera will sometimes pan to her mark, or the way she gives certain looks to Noah and that, it's all subtext, that's all there. And I think that's sort of what the purpose of that scene ultimately is sort of a bit of that development that Mio's looking out for the rest of her team, even though she hasn't got much time left. She wants to keep everyone safe, I suppose.
Yeah, it's all pretty cool. I do like the Faunus region because it's just kind of interesting. And there's a lot to it. Of course, you don't explore most of it in this chapter, so I won't touch on all of it. But, you know, just having that rocky area is quite cool because when we first saw the game in the trailers, again, I will be alluding to this a lot, but a lot of the gameplay was shown to be in the Eagus Wilderness. I thought
Yeah.
like 90% of this map for the whole game was going to be rocky. Like, unironically, I thought, oh my god, everything is rock. No, it's just because they showed off Chapter Two's gameplay a lot.
Always has been, always will be.
Yeah, I am rock. But yeah, it's an interesting place. Again, the music for places like this is still quite subdued, like we say. They're pretty ambient, which is fine. They're not worse. They're just less noticeable. That's all it is.
I also want to call out, it's a smaller scene, it continues like the building dynamics of the characters. But I like that scene, yes. That entire bit, and even like when like Lance does like the dive bomb into it. And this is like one of the first moments in the game to make me full on laugh out loud. It's when he's like, Uni's complaining at him, calls him a muppet of course again. And then he's like, you're already aware, what's the difference? She just goes, the difference is you're an arsehole.
Yeah, it's so good. Like, it's just classic banter. And it's so
It is.
nice to see the classic banter. I feel like with that, they sort of really struck a balance in the comedy between Xenoblade 1 that had nearly none of it, and then Xenoblade 2, which maybe leaned into it a little too heavily in early scenes. Or was it maybe a bit too slapstick, one might say? But this game's got like, it's got the comedy there, but like, they're not trying too hard to make you laugh. They're just having banter and also making these characters grow a bit more. So it's really cool to see that.
Yeah, it feels very real the way that they're written. Yeah, and
especially
and
one thing.
Also, go
on. Like one thing I was looking out for is, and it's kind of the same thing I've looked out for in all the games, is do they have a interaction between every combination of the main characters, where the other games come close. But in this one, I was really looking out for it. So even in that scene where the focus is obviously on the water and stuff like that, you even have a moment where Noah and Tyon are talking to each other in respects that, what their roles are in the team. So it's just nice how they slip in those little bits of interaction to be like, no, everyone is familiar with each other. It's not all revolving around Rex,
Yeah, that's very true. And particularly because I thought going into this, I thought Tyon was going to be one of my least favourite characters. I don't know, I thought he just seemed a bit more like generic smart guy, pushes his glasses up on his face.
Yeah.
I mean, I do that. When you've got glasses, it just happens. But it's like, it seemed very generic, but they do a lot with him early on, and I fell in love with his character, and I think it was at this point where I realised Tyon's climbing up to be one of my favourites, so
he's
they
very,
really do.
very good.
Yeah, they get that balance in right.
It's like you say, they do more than just make him the smart character. He does a lot. He has a lot of thoughts. Again, in the early scenes, this is something I said while I was streaming the game, but I would argue that in like the first 3 chapters, Tyon probably gets more focused than like Noah. Really?
I think so, yeah. And it's not. I mean, his story doesn't his arc doesn't even really take focus until chapter 3. But even 1 and 2, he's a big part of it. I guess he's the tactician. So he's sort of taking the charge a little bit, which makes sense. It's sort of usually you sort of expect Rex takes the charge because he's the protagonist. Shulk takes charge because he's the protagonist. Like even like Dunban would be like, "Yeah, Shulk, you take charge." Which I mean, not that
part of that whole arc is Dunban lets Shulk take the lead.
Yeah,
but it's great that Tyon does it here. Yeah,
but it's nice that Tyon. It makes sense that his character would take charge. They don't just force Noah in because he's the main protagonist.
He's the antagonist.
Well, in a sense.
The other one. That's the other one. That's always something to appreciate. Yeah, that's a cool scene though. It's all fun, the banter.
And I guess the next big moment that we see is, skipping over the chain tag stuff, we'll get to that in gameplay. We get another flashback to do with Noah's sword. Which, do we ever find out what he calls it?
That was a thing that a lot of people have said coming out the game, and there's a couple different answers. It's like one answer is that you're not meant to know because you're not meant to know. All you need to know is that it is central to him. My original prediction was that he called it Joren, but probably not.
I considered that, but he names it before Joren dies, so I think.
Yeah. I think there was another name. I think Truth Singer is the name. Like, if you look in the hero list, which is something people don't really do, then it says that his sword is called Truth Singer or something similar. Possibly, I mean, it's actually meant to be called like the Origin Blade or whatever. I believe. I don't really know.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't think we do know for sure, so it was a bit of an odd scene, but
It's
I guess it was a
interesting.
way to talk about Joren more and maybe give more focus to the sword, because the sword itself is very interesting.
It is, and we'll get to that a bit more later. But I do also love that, again, I sort of touched upon this earlier, that Riku, there's a lot, they're constantly teasing that there's more to him. And we never really get an answer beyond the fact that a later side quest reveals he's one of the legendary Nopon, who all have like their age listed as question marks, so who knows how long they've been around for. But it is interesting that he gives Noah this very important, crazy, powerful sword. Like, what is Riku's deal? I want to learn more.
We could learn more in the DLC. We'll have to find out.
think
That's
so,
what a lot of
yeah.
people have speculated. Because it's
I'd
even
imagine.
said that Lucky 7 was made through the combination of Riku's craftsmanship and Melia's imbuement of magic. So it's like there's a lot of speculation you could do there at a later point.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think that maybe that's our future Xenoblade predictions video if we end up doing that or something. But
Quite possibly,
yeah.
yeah.
There's definitely I even though I kind of wish we had learned a little bit more, I do like all the mystery with Riku. And then Banana's just cooking and fun, but I still like her. So
Yeah, she's an absolute gem in the party of just chilling, like cooking. She's doing a good job.
yes, and also now we get our first, I guess, our major, our end of chapter major confrontation against Silvercoat Ethel. And also Bolearis, my man. I like him a lot. He's so cool. I
Yeah,
don't know
he's
why.
such a cool character. I don't know what it is about him. I have a
yeah.
weird liking for side characters, and that's him.
He's great. He's up there with MWAMBA in levels,
Genuinely, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a bit about them earlier. We sort of saw the introduction of Consul K and how he goes to meet them. And it was very interesting that this whole idea that we're sort of learning more about this later, but they're reduced to like a dirt rank colony, which I did not expect, going into the game. And we'll get more to that in
something about
chapter
Ethel's
3.
character already.
It does, yeah. We straight away, I like how we see her first as like before like the takeover of the consul, before the whole mind thing. We get to see her that she's noble. We get to see her talking to like her normal troops, that she clearly cares about them, and she's like with them like, we'll all get strong again so that we can eat the gourmet food or whatever they're talking about. I like that sort of introduction to her. But then when she comes out in full mind control of the consul, she's scary.
Yeah, it shows what
Absolute
they're
girl
capable
boss.
of. Yeah. Ethel's great. I do like that whole scene of like Noah's trying to be like, no, it's us, and it almost works because of the fog. The fog is another thing that I thought would be much more important than it ended up being, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I thought that was going to be like a big endgame thing, that alongside the moats on Offseeing. Like those two things, I was keeping my eye on like a hawk through the game of like, they're going to be so important later in the game, I'm sure of it. And they weren't.
No, I feel like the moats at least has like enough of a meaning, I guess, even if I think the fact that it has almost no meaning is kind of part of it. But the fog is interesting. Do you think it's meant to just be like the instability of the two worlds?
I think that is basically what it is, but I thought we'd learn more about it, and it's like, no, it's just that's it. It's like, okay, fair enough, I get it.
Yeah, because even in the opening cutscene, one of the first things Noah said is, our world is Ionios, which means eternity, and it's ironic because our world is dying. And it's like, is it dying? Because the whole point of Moebius is that they're constructing the war itself. So is it the world dying just the fact that more annihilation events are occurring? And that's I guess that's the idea of it.
Weird.
Yeah, I feel like it could have. I don't hate what they do with it, but I think there could have been more. Like, yeah. I guess they just needed something for like a big threat later on for like the city and the reason why some of it's torn apart. But it doesn't really go anywhere major. You're right.
Yeah, I wish it did, but
yeah.
I like that Ethel is introduced here. Of course, she was. I feel like outside of the main cast and Vandham, she was like the next big character in the build-up to the game. We do at the beginning of Chapter 2 get to see a flashback to her, but it's very unimportant. It's just, she saved the Keves lot when she was younger, and that's it.
True, yeah.
I thought they were going to have a much closer link than that, but it was all a bit unexplored. This is kind of the big thing about Ethel, I feel, is I found her to be a very interesting character that we had a lot with, but could have had more from. but that's not the nature of the game.
Yeah.
But, we had that part where she sort of vaguely recognised us, but not enough. We escaped through the fog, and then we do have that confrontation with her where we beat her. Again, wasn't expecting to beat her first time, but I guess we did. I'll take it.
Well, yeah, they and then we get our big boy K coming in here.
Yes.
Who, yes, this is our first proper look at, the consoles being Moebius and all the stuff of the consoles. I think, I didn't really know much about the consoles going into the game because I didn't watch the later stuff, like the direct. So I really had no idea what they were about. I mean, it's clear they're villains. It's not.
Yeah, that's
it's not
obvious.
hard. But I do like this whole idea of the consoles, and we'll get more to this. I think is a chapter 3 thing where they discuss, the fact that consoles are on both sides. But this whole idea of that these guys controlling the war just to keep themselves living. We see this in here where he sustains himself through the flame clocks. This is our look that the flame clocks are made to sustain Moebius and give them strength, and how he takes their lives. And I think that, there's sort of talk about how good are the villains of this game. There kind of there's interesting elements to them, but I like the whole idea of the consoles and the Moebius as these guys who basically these puppeteers basically to the world. And this is our first real look at that, the way he straight up consumes the lives of the soldiers around him and starts to consume Ethel. It's a very a big look at what the antagonists of this game are going to be outside of our little tease with Wild Ride.
Yeah, and people are given the consoles flack for being quite sort of basic. It's just they want to live forever, power hungry commander people. And I get that there isn't much more to them individually, but as a general idea, I actually quite like it still personally.
Yeah.
I wish they maybe explored the unique abilities of each console more, but hey,
yeah.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I think definitely something that we'll get to when it comes to Chapter 3 in Joren. I think there's something they show little bits and they don't take it further really with their abilities. But
yeah,
I do. Yeah, I almost I know they're a bit cartoony at points, and it's almost a bit like a villain of the week on a Saturday morning cartoon with the different consoles you'll get through later on. But I also don't hate that. I thought Consul K was kind of fun, and he really fit the tone of the scene, and taking him down. Weight of Life, man, what a banger.
Yes. I honestly, it's such a shame that this track only plays twice in the whole story.
Counterattack plays twice every chapter.
Yeah, Engage the Enemy and Counterattack both play around 7 or 8 times, I think, across the game. This plays once here and once in chapter 4, and that's it. The second half of the game never plays, even though there were so many points where it would have been cool, but I guess they just didn't feel like it. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's more of the whole thing of, again, this world is a bit more somber, and there's too many it would feel weird in a fight against N, it wouldn't be fitting, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I still think that it would have been nice to hear it more. Hopefully it comes back in the DLC. I'm sure it probably will. Counterattack came back in Torna, so I expect it. But it's such a great track. I liked it at the time, but it's one of those where, looking back at it, I appreciate it even more now that I've listened to it more and more, and I basically on an eternal loop. It's the endless now for me. It's listening to The Weight of Life. I'm basically.
Back when we first heard it in one of the early trailers or whatever, I remember people were transposing it on YouTube, and I was listening to those versions of it where people were trying to figure out exactly what the chords were and stuff because the official version hadn't been announced yet.
Yeah.
And I was listening to that on repeat, and I was like, God damn, this is good. I can't wait for it to play. And it's just so hype. It's an amazing one. I don't know if I would call it the best theme because there are so many good themes in this game, but
it's up there.
Hey, at the very least, it's up there. It might be my favourite. I haven't had enough time to think about it.
And it's also
amazing.
Even though it's used very sparingly, when it is used, it's so effective. How it fits the timing of the scene. It's all so well timed to the music. We start it off with when Uni and Tyon enter their Ouroboros form, and we've also got Sans and Sans. God damn it, Lance and Sans.
Yo,
God, no. No.
I love when the console says brr, brr, brr. Okay, damn.
Well, they do have the glowing eye, I suppose. It's all God damn it! Let's start that one again, shall we? Lance and Senna also have their Ouroboros form. But and it starts off very hype, but when the song does that bit where I love when any music track does, where it goes quiet for a moment, you know, when they start to realise Noah gets this idea of, can we take out the flame clock?
Yeah.
And then the flutes kick in as him and Mio decide to do it. And just the whole badass scene where he unsheaths the Origin Sword for the first time, and he gets like the Iron Man armor. We saw that in the trailer, but it's so badass.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, aside from the music really fitting the scene's choreography as is, and you know, the Ouroboros unlocking, which was all very cool, especially when you go into that fight. Noah then drawing Lucky 7 was very cool because it tells you that Noah's blade, like, he has a sword, like a regular sword as a blade. In the cutscenes, in the flashbacks, we see that his regular blade is just a sword, but he's painted it red. Because you can physically see, like, paint marks, I believe. But it turns out that the sword he uses is not the sword. He uses a sheath. And then Lucky 7 is underneath it. And I'm like, that's such a cool idea. Is like, he doesn't use a sword. His blade is a sheath with a real sword underneath it. It's like, that's badass to me. I don't know. So the fact we get to see him pull it off and have like the arm where he then holds Lucky 7, you know, him and Mio going up to destroy the flame clock. And then, you know, I like how... I'm waffling a lot here, but... One thing that happens across the game is that they don't just do one route, like, of choice, and then go for it. They analyse, like, all the outcomes. You'll see it a lot when they infiltrate both the castles. But, like, they don't just choose one route, and they're like, okay, cool, let's go. They think of every possible outcome and every possible route they could take. So when they're destroying this flame clock, they're like, are you sure we could do this? This might kill everyone. You know, because if they didn't include that, a million people on Reddit would be like, oh, they didn't even consider it, that's poor writing. No, they thought about it, they were realistic about it, and I really appreciate them for that.
Yeah, they definitely there's the whole bit as well where, like, you know, they try to break the flame clock with their Ouroboros forms, and it doesn't work, you know, there's all build up to it. And it's just such a high energy scene. For Chapter 2 even, like, it reminds me of, like, Xenoblade 2, spoilers here, I guess, I think we've already sort of implied.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, the end of Xenoblade 2 when they destroy one of the towers on Indel, and you know, the whole bit where they're like falling with Mithra and that, and like it reminds me of that scene, and that's like a chapter 7 or 8 scene in Xenoblade 2. We're only on chapter 2 here. I
think it's chapter 9 even.
It might be the start of chapter 9 actually. Yeah, it's the end of chapter 8 or start of chapter 9. Yeah. So the fact that we're getting hype stuff like that this early, it really. I mean, it makes sense because this game is set in the war again. It doesn't build up to war. It's the premise, but it really is so hype early on. And you know, you take down the Consul K. There's the whole bit where Noah actually and Mio decide to play for him, which is interesting. I think again it speaks to Noah's character and his empathy. I found it interesting that this almost doesn't come up again. Like, I thought we'd see him playing for more Moebius. But he doesn't really in like any of the side quests we get later on, the hero quests. But still, I thought it was an interesting idea, and even the fact that he does it, but the fact that, you know, not everyone agrees with him as well. You know, Lanz is like, that's messed up, dude.
Yeah, they're actively like, you shouldn't be playing for them. These guys are evil. Is very interesting. It calls to like I said, it calls to Noah's character a lot and Mio's. But it also tells us, oh, hang on, there are more old people. It's not just Vandham. So, you know, they're sort of learning more about the world, and it's really jarring across the story where there are these things that we're like, oh, that's like a normal thing. Everyone knows that, even from the other games. Like being old and, you know, aging is a thing we see in Chapter 3. And it's like, they're like, what? Like, I've never heard of this. Like, they sound like people who have committed tax fraud. And they're like, what? Me? No. It's so funny. I love it.
It is really great. And of course, it pays off big time later down the line. But it is a constant thing that always... It's just a fun dynamic. And the way they play with it. Both in terms of humour and emotional impact. You know, like when Vandham first, you know, tells them, you know, I've been alive 60 years, me, and the reactions on their faces. That's quite an emotional, impactful moment. But also, it plays off to some humour as well. It's a really interesting way they use it. And that's pretty much mostly the end. We do get a little bit where we see Ethel's okay, and she's sort of like, yeah, you guys are all right, you can stay here. We'll probably get more to that in chapter 3, sort of the dynamic of Colony 4, I think. And we see that the queens, we see both queens, Robo-Nia and Robo-Melia, just send, not that we know this at the time, but, sending out Ouroboros our targets now. We've got a target on their back. And that's sort of how the chapter ends, the whole world, as Vandham said, the whole world's going to be after you, it's
a cool idea. Yeah, I really like that where you are on the party feels like it's weird. Like they're simultaneously on the back foot because they're fighting against the whole world now, but they're also pushing it. Like Xenoblade 2 kind of did this too, where it's like, oh, everyone's going to be gunning after the Aegis, but they're trying to make it to the World Tree. It's a similar idea, but I feel like especially in this story, they show that off more in early cutscenes. So I do appreciate that, how they have that idea. Don't really know what else there is to say about it. It's just a cool idea.
Yeah, and that is sort of our tease for the next chapter, and that's how chapter 2 ends. So that is pretty much it. So I guess before we end things off here, Kai, what did you think playing chapter 1 and 2 in the game? How are you feeling about it? Looking back at it now, these first 2 chapters as sort of the intro to the game.
I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things that really appealed to me was how it opened up a lot of questions. The number one thing is the world setting. I'll say that. The way that they set the world up and the background of how this place works is like the best thing about it. And it's something this game does really, really well in the opening especially. And then the other thing is the character interactions, which of course only get better as time goes on. They're really good. Those are the 2 main highlights of the game for me, but it did have, in terms of the main story, a lot of speculation from my perspective. A lot of that speculation ended up sort of not happening. Maybe I was going a bit too far with it, which is a shame, but that's how it is.
Kai, I've seen you speculate playing Ace Attorney. You have some wild theories, man.
I do. Again, my original ideas when Noah and me were fighting in Chapter 1, they got transported to another world through the Annihilation event. I legit thought that happened and thought, yeah, that's normal. That definitely would have happened. I guess the 1% chance on the odd chance it is right, and then I seem like a genius.
Yeah, but, might as well go for it.
Yeah, from a gameplay perspective, it was really fun to introduce it all. Very fun to play as everyone. But yeah, overall, just a really solid start, and I really enjoyed looking at seeing like, oh, okay, this is how it all works. Where are we going to go from this foundation? It was a very, very good foundation.
Yeah, you pretty much said it perfectly. I think chapter 1 and 2, they have a lot to juggle with because, this game doesn't ease into the world like Xenoblade 2 does, and even 1 to a lesser extent, but still. It throws you straight into the premise, and it throws you straight into all 6 party members. There's a lot to juggle there, but they manage to balance it perfectly, and you never feel overwhelmed. I think also what it does is there's so little side content here. We don't really get... There's like 5 side quests at this point. They don't really open up till chapter 3, which suddenly, dear God, there's so many, which we'll get to, of course, next discussion. But they really ease you into things in a perfect way, and whilst at the same time raising the stakes high very early on. So yeah, it's just a great way to start things off, and I knew easily at this point, I'm going to love this game. I'm already loving it, so...
Yeah, brilliant start.
Absolutely, and there's plenty more to come. We're going to be doing further discussions of this. We'll be doing our next one, which we don't know exactly when this will be releasing, but in between our regular monthly podcasts. Next chapters we'll have 3 and 4. We'll do a video on 5 and 6, and then we'll do a video on 7 and the overall ending of the game. Not to mention, we'll probably do some extra Xenoblade videos breaking down things like the gameplay and the video on the heroes and the optional content. So do stay tuned to BunchaJokahs for all of that, as well as our regular monthly podcast about Nintendo news. You can find us, of course, wherever you're listening to us, be it YouTube or Spotify and other podcasting sites for audio-only versions, all under the name BunchaJokahs, should be easy to find. But also, Kai, where else can people find you at?
Yeah, if you did want to see me physically play through chapters 1 and 2, that's all over on Twitch in my highlights. If you go to collections on Twitch, it's all there. edited down. You know, you can see how I physically was thinking of things as we went through the game. So that's where you can find me. I'm basically, by the time this comes out, I will have been done with Xenoblade 3 until Wave 3 comes out. So, you know, that's pretty bittersweet, but it's cool to see at least 250 odd hours in.
Do you know what you're playing next on stream? What will be up when this video goes up, or is that later to come thing?
It will be a bit of a combination of a lot of different things. It's nothing in particular, so you've got to come and find out.
Interesting, yeah. Definitely go check it out. There'll be a link in the description below, so go check that out. And of course, a big thanks to our friend Sam, our graphic designer who works hard. He made our logo. He makes our thumbnails, even though he's only on chapter 3 or something. Hurry up, Sam. Mm-hmm. Come on,
call him
we
out.
Believe in you.
Come on, mate. You can't even do the thumbnails for the rest of the videos.
We're going to have to send you images, or I'm going to have to make them, and that'll be even worse. So, good luck. But of course, thank you, Sam, and there's a link to his Twitter in the description below. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next video. Plenty more Xenoblade to come. See you guys then.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.